that's okay with everybody. Just a few people wanted to be able to share it afterwards. Okay, let's begin. Most of what I have to say is prepared on a PowerPoint. So I'm going to be sharing a PowerPoint screen. And I hope that you can still see my face or however it works. Tell me if this works. 1 second. I'm just setting up the share. And go into. Okay, how does that work, everybody? Can you see between doctors and kings? Yeah, and can you also see my face on the screen?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's what I wanted. Okay, so when I was growing up in Toronto, Rabbi Hecht was the rabbi of a little shul in our neighborhood in Toronto. He came in, I think, I was still in high school, or but he was there for quite a few years with his family, moved into the neighborhood, and I pretty much grew up in that shul. And he was also the founding director of something called Nishma, from obviously Naaseh Nishma, which was a Torah learning institute and research institute that he would write and produce lots of different materials. And in particular, he produced a booklet for a Shavuot Shiur. And I remember the booklet well. I've used it many, many, many times. And when thinking about giving this pre-Shavuot Shiur, I kind of reached back into the materials that he put there together, and I'm going to draw from it. Unfortunately, Rabbi Hecht just passed away a couple weeks ago. And it was a really, really tragic end. He was placed in a coma by COVID almost 2 years ago. Is that right, Dodi? 2 years?
A little over 2 years ago, yeah. January 2021. Yeah.
January 2021. And he's been fighting in a coma for over 2 years and just passed away, which I think for many people is something of a relief to be held between Shamayim va'aretz. And I hope this shiur will be an ilui neshama. Certainly, our Chazal say that when you say Torah in somebody's name, you're medovev siftotav. You make his lips move, because really this was his chiyut. Rabbi Hecht was somebody who absolutely lived and breathed Torah. It was his entire passion. And it really was his essence in so many ways. So being able to teach his Torah over, I think, is one of the ways in which what he brought to the world will continue to be felt and perceived and influence people. So that's my introduction. Okay, this is a Gemara I imagine is familiar to many of you, and I hope so, because I know I've taught it almost every year in preparation for Shavuot. Guys? And it kind of gives the backdrop to this scene. Okay? So this, the Gemara reads as follows. V'yatzvu b'tachtit ha'ar, Am Yisrael gathered at the bottom of the mountain of Har Sinai. V'amar Rav Avidimi bar Chama bar Chasa, melamed shekafa HaKadosh Baruch Hu aleim et har kikikit. This teaches that God held the mountain over their heads like a gigit. Who's familiar? Just put up your hand if you can. Who has heard of this Gemara, familiar with the idea of God holding the mountain over their heads? Yes. Yocheved is. Rachel. Yeah. Good. Okay. So what I'd like to do is give something of an original take to the shir, really borrowing from Rabbi Hecht. Okay. So where does this come from, this idea that God held a mountain over their heads? Shalom, Rani. So nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. So the basic idea is a kind of logical thinking through that the rabbis thought what sort of choice did Bnei Israel actually have, being brought out into the desert, being guided by God, who just demolished the Egyptians, who is feeding them all their food, giving them all their water. They're in the middle of a desert and they're being protected by these miraculous clouds. If Bnei Israel would say, no, you know what, nice idea, but no thank you, it probably wouldn't work out well with them. And so Bnei Israel, we understand, are somewhat, I'm just stopping the share for a moment just to check that everybody's in the room and nobody in the waiting room. Okay, good. Am Yisrael is being trapped, but the Gemara goes on to say that this is a great excuse for not keeping Torah. That this is what's called a moda'ah rabbah le'oraita. And what Chazal mean by that is there's a halachic idea that if somebody says to you, sell me your house, and you say, no, I'm not interested in selling you my house, and they say, I'll pay you $10,000, and they say, no, thank you, it's not worth $10,000. They say, I'll pay you $200,000, and you say, no, my house is not for sale. And then they take out a gun, and they say, you don't understand, you're going to sell me the house. And you're obviously afraid for your life. And so you say, okay, but come back tomorrow and I'll have the paperwork ready. And before you go to show up the next day, you go to Beit Din and you supply what's called a moda'ah. A moda'ah means you supply them with a notice that you're going to sign something under duress. You're going to sign something that you really don't mean to sign. Okay, wait, somebody's just come into the waiting room here, so I'm just letting somebody else in. Hello, Sylvia. Welcome. Oh, somebody else coming in, I'm sorry. Shalom, Sylvia.
Hi.
Welcome. Okay.
Hi.
Nice to see you. We're just underway here. I'm so glad that you're joining us. Thank you.
Yeah, with pleasure. Yeah.
We're talking about the famous Gemara of holding the mountain over their heads. Okay. So you can sign a document inside of Beit Din and say that what I'm going to sign tomorrow doesn't count. I don't really mean it. And later on, when you're, safe from repercussions, you can go back to the court and you can say, look, this signed contract is not really a signed contract and it doesn't count. And so what Rav Avidimi is saying, or what Rav actually saying in the Gemara, is saying that Bnei Yisrael could have gone to Har Sinai and say, this doesn't count. We were forced into this relationship. We really didn't have a chance otherwise, and Har Sinai does not count. And instead of explaining why back and forth Har Sinai does count, the rabbis say, you know what? Good point. That the circumstances of accepting the brit, the covenant of Har Sinai, under duress is not a full covenant. And so the answer that the rabbis gives us why halacha is obligatory to us, why we are actually signed on to God, is not that Har Sinai wasn't under duress, but is given 1,000 years later when the Jews were in Purim, in Achashverosh's kingdom, and they accepted the Torah. Again, kimu v'kiblu, kimu masha kiblu kfar. They re-accepted the Torah at the time of Purim. Now, if I could ask a question to the group, why is Purim the antidote to the problem of having the Torah foisted upon us, forced upon us at Har Sinai? Why do the rabbis say that the acceptance at Purim doesn't have the same problem of duress like Har Sinai?
Could you explain what happened on Purim?
So Purim, the the Jews said, we have been saved by God, right? Haman was about to kill us, and God made sure that Esther was the queen at the right time, and Mordecai was at court at the right time, and through all the machinations of what the Purim story is, in the end they say, "Thank you, Hashem, for saving us." And by giving Purim its status as a holiday, by granting God thanksgiving at Purim time and saying God is responsible, this isn't our luck, this isn't just us who did it, that was an acceptance of God's malchut, God's kingship, and so they became enabled or committed to the Torah everything previous. Why was writing Purim into our national event calendar an act of receiving the Torah, which was better than, in certain respects, than receiving the Torah v'nasa v'nishma at Har Sinai? Okay, so Yocheved says they accepted in gratitude, but not under duress. So tell me just a little bit more. Why was there no duress at Har Sinai? At Purim in Achashverosh. They were under threat to be killed. They were Haman did, stand there. There was an out force. Ronnie, I see a hand up. Did you want to? No, that's me. That's my cursor. I'm sorry. So Yocheved, you're on the right track, but bring it all the way home.
Because they did teshuva and they davened to Hashem before, and then Hashem saved them, and then they accepted it. Meaning the duress, they were under duress when they did teshuva, but I think it was after they were saved that they did the kimu v'kiblu and reaccepted the Torah, and so it was after the duress.
It was after they were saved at Kriyat Yam Suf. It was 50 days later, or actually 43 days later. They've been saved. There's no Egyptians threatening them now.
But they're still in the desert.
Oh, so that's the point. Why they're in the desert there, and what are they not? What choices do they have in Purim, in Shushan?
I mean, they could have gone back to how they were before the decree and just living the way they were.
Right. In other words, in Shushan, they had bread, they had water, they had all sorts of natural ways of supplying themselves. The point was they were living a non-miraculous existence in Purim, in Shushan. That the choice was, I could look at the victory of Mordecai and Esther against Haman as a natural victory. I could look at it as really smart political people who made the right decision at the right time. Like many people look at the 6-Day War, the choice is there to see, okay, that could be God's hand. It's not necessarily God's hand. The choice was to view events as a non-miraculous thing. That choice doesn't exist. The close encounter, the direct encounter with God at Har Sinai makes it impossible to see that way. Okay. So let's go forward now. I'm going back to sharing my screen. Okay, we're back to sharing screen. You can all see the screens?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, following this Gemara, there's another Gemara. And this time it says something different. I'll read this one in English. Just gonna move my screen here for a second. Okay, this is another story about the necessity of the forced nature of keeping Har Sinai, how the Brit at Har Sinai was kind of forced upon us. Said Chizkiah, what is written? In heaven you pronounce sentence, the earth was tranquil with fright. What does it mean, tranquil with fright? Yira v'shaketa, says the Hebrew. If it is tranquil, how is it afraid? If it is afraid, how is it tranquil? Right? There seems to be a contradiction in this verse. Says Reish Lakish, what is it written? It was evening and it was morning, behold, the 6th day. right? Unlike every other day of creation where we say Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi'i, the sixth day has a Hey Hayidiyah, the definite article, the sixth day. Why is there a definite article, the sixth day? This teaches that God made a condition with the creation. If the Jews accept the Torah, you will exist. However, if not, I will return you to chaos. Okay? So a few questions here. First of all, what's this got to do with six? What is it attaching to with another six? Anybody know? So it's the 6th of Sivan. Okay, the 6th of Sivan is the date of Shavuot. Okay, so the idea here is that on Shavuot, all of creation is confirmed. Before Shavuot, the entire world is kind of waiting in balance, is kind of precariously poised until Shavuos comes along and the Jews accept the Torah. Otherwise, the world would have reduced itself to chaos. Now, what I'd like to ask you, and this is kind of the main question of the Shi'ur, is these two Gemaras, the mountain over the head and Chizkiah returning the world to Tohu Vavohu, to chaos, are on some level saying the same thing. They're saying in both cases that Am Yisrael must receive the Torah. The result of not keeping the Torah is disaster on some level. But what's the difference between the two? Why repeat it in these two different ways? What's being said by Rav Avidimi, which is the mountain over the head Gemara, and what's being said by Chizkiah that's different? You hear the question? Anybody want to suggest? Okay, I'll say the first. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, here it's all of creation, like meaning before when the mountain is suspended over our head, it's just the Jews would be destroyed, but it seems like the rest of the world would go on and continue. And here it seems like no, all of creation, nature, the non-Jews, the entire world would be destroyed if not for this moment.
Excellent. Very good. Any other differences that you see?
Well, the idea of a condition, it feels like the first one is a threat where it doesn't necessarily have to follow, but the second version is almost inevitable. Yeah, this is this is reality. Very good. Yes, very much so. This is like a reality that there's no way around it. Good. Okay, I want to pause for a second. Not pause. I just want to digress for a moment to a side point, which is in the first one. What's a gigit? What's this mountain? God held the mountain over their head. I translated it here as a tub. Okay? Let me ask you something. What happens when you take a tub and you put it over the heads of the people? I will demonstrate. Look at my great animation here. This is Am Yisrael, and this is the tub over their head. Rotate the tub upside down, place it over the head. Can I get a round of applause for that? I worked hours to get that going. Okay? I believe you.
Thank you. What am I trying to illustrate here? What is kind of surprising about this analogy to Har Kigigit?
They aren't flattened.
That's right. That's what I always thought, right? I always imagined that they're underneath this mountain. God drops the mountain on their heads, and they're pancakes. They're killed instantly. They are buried, and that's what the Gemara says. I will bury you. That will be your burial place. But the Gemara says it's a gigit, it's a tub, it's a hollowed out thing. They could have said a lot of things. They held it over the head like a rock, right? But saying this to me has a different image.
Yeah.
Not so much that they're being buried, but they're being trapped, that they're being isolated from the outside world. That Har Sinai, you can accept in two different ways. If you accept it willingly, then you're out in the open. You're connected to the world beyond you. If you deny it, if you are unable to accept it, it will cover you. It will smother you. It won't kill you. You will continue to live, but you'll continue to live a kind of trapped existence. You will be contained by it. And I think that's very apt. We'll talk more about this difference, but just keep that image in mind. Okay, so here is a summary chart. A lot of the answers that you already gave. Rav Avidimi on the left is the Har Kigigi, right? And Chizkiah is the world turning back to chaos. So this was Yochevet's answer. Who is being threatened? So Am Yisrael is being threatened alone in Rav Avidimi, and the entire world is being threatened by Chizkiah, exactly what Yochevet said. What's the result? So the result is being buried under a mountain in the first. Okay, wait, we have another guest who's joining us here. I just have to admit somebody in. And when it comes to Shalom, Shalom. Okay. And as opposed to being Shalom, Portia, welcome. Chizkiah, it's hello. Chizkiah is chaos. Okay, just like you said also. Now, this is the point that Dodi Lee made, that in Rav Avidimi, it's a direct punishment. God decides to drop a mountain over their heads, right? God could have chosen not to drop a mountain over their heads. And in Chizkiah, it's a consequence. It's a condition that is set up in the nature of the earth, right? Sorry, I'm just looking at the chat message. You're right about Shavuos, Yocheved, but we're going to have to leave that point for now, okay? Consequences, I'm sorry. Okay, it now kind of comes to the title of the shiur. If you would describe the relationship of God to the people as described in Rav Avidimi's description and contrast it to the relationship that Chizkiah is talking about, and you think about, hint, the title of my shiur, which would be which? Who would be the doctor relationship and who would be the king relationship? What would you say? Which of the two?
The king would be Chizkiah.
The king would be
No.
Chizkiah. Why do you think so?
Why? No, it's a sign of power. Where it's
To
like
be
the
able to
entire
destroy the
world.
entire world. Yeah, king in that sense is like in charge of the entire world. Okay.
No, it's just the natural consequence of things. It's the way nature works. If you don't take the cure, you don't recover from the illness.
So you think Chizkiah is describing more of the doctor relationship?
Yeah.
So I would agree with Sylvia. I think Rachel has certainly a really good point in terms of the majesty of ruling over the entire world, and we definitely coronate God king of the entire world, Melech Malchei HaMelachim, on Rosh Hashanah. But in the case of the shiur, in terms of the idea between direct punishment or consequence, I think the idea of king and doctor going this way, I think, is a good way to look at it. So this is a distinction that I learned from Rabbi Hecht. In his shiur, he described two different relationships between Am Yisrael, and the truth is, Rabbi Hecht didn't make it up himself. He took it from Rav Bloch, who was one of the Telzer yeshivas, Rav Avram Yitzhak Bloch, who wrote a book called the Shirei Da'at. And in that book, there's an essay that describes this difference between kings and doctors. And what I'd like to do is take this basic dichotomy that we've developed over here and think more deeply about this different relationship about God's laws being, on one hand, like being healthy, like something that is universally true, and that our relationship at Har Sinai is about following those rules for our own benefit, right? If we don't follow them, then the consequence is chaos. The world falls apart. God is recommending, as it were, the best prescription for a good life, as opposed to Rav Avidimi's kind of construct, which is God is demanding, God is commanding, God is requiring of us to follow his mitzvot. And here it's not a question of how good they are or how recommended they are or how much they help us. We do them because we are told. And that's a very different relationship. In the end, Torah is both. But these two different things is something of a dichotomy that we oscillate back and forth. Each have important relationships, and each also have certain shortcomings. And it's that I want to develop a little bit further, taking really from the writings of Rabbi Hecht. So Rabbi Hecht would write insights. He was really a very prolific writer, some of which, not enough, I have to say, is available online at the Nishma website. But he has an essay called The Flow of Sinai. And here I want to read a little bit what he has to say about that and put it into this dynamic of kings and doctors, okay? So first he says like this: it is argued that this is natural, that the deity placed such drives within humanity so that the individual will be driven towards the religion. This is deemed to be the challenge of faith. Faith naturally exists within a person. The question is whether one will follow these natural tendencies to their conclusion, to the encounter with the divine. Through the feeling of belief, the objective is for the individual and the religion to naturally merge. The goal is contentment, and as religion is but the natural outgrowth of the individual's own desire. With religion and the satisfaction of the drive, contentment is achieved. So this sounds to us like a doctor or king relationship. What would you say? The idea of religion being this natural drive, and when we find God, when we relate to God, it's like being fulfilled. We've achieved that fulfillment by going ahead and achieving godliness. What would you say? Sounds like a doctor or sounds like a king? So I'm reading here the doctor, but the doctor certainly is like the psychologist, right? The psychologist who says you have certain natural drives, healthy, good drives, and what we want you to do is fulfill them so you can feel satisfaction, you can feel pleasure, you can feel meaning, you can feel fulfilled. All those good things. Sylvia, were you saying something?
No, I'm just listening.
Okay. And then Rabbi Hecht goes on to really contradict that. He really wants to say that this is a problematic, or at least a limited way. It's not a problem as long as it's taken within context. I think it's very true that we should look at religion as something which is in our best interest, something which is helpful and meaningful and really is a good thing to do. But if that's all it is, we have a problem. And so Rabbi Hecht goes on to say like this: Sinai, though, declares the flow to essentially begin with God and not humanity. His existence is declared, not as an outgrowth of the satisfaction of a drive, but as a statement in reality. How does the Ten Commandments begin? I am Hashem, your God, who took you out of Egypt. Meaning it starts not by people finding God, not by people believing in God, not by people discovering God. It starts with God is the given. The existence of God is established. His might and his dominion are facts. God is not the object of a human drive, something that is looking for faith. He is the subject. It's God that is commanding. It is humanity that is called upon to respond. The flow is from God to the human, and the flow is through Torah. Sorry, I just went on to the next one. At Sinai, he declared his will, right? That's the idea. Sinai's encounter with God, though, does not yield contentment, but disarray. Torah challenged our personal essence and the human will. God does not just declare his being, but also the demands he expects from the human being to fulfill. He is not just the object of satisfaction of our religious drives. He confronts us. He calls upon us to act differently in response to his will than we would otherwise act. We are in conflict. So here he's talking about God as a king, and there's a benefit to having God demand of us personally, directly from us, and not just going about Sinai as this is the best thing for you. This is exactly what you want. The sort of enlightened self-interest that we're supposed to have is a good thing, but sometimes Sinai and the mitzvah is to confront us, is to call upon us, is an important thing. So, anybody heard of Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein? Okay, so I've also heard of Rabbi Aaron. He's my Rebbe from Yeshivat Har Etzion. But I'm talking about the other Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, who wrote a book called The Seven Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. Okay? So, how many more mitzvot do Jews have than non-Jews? A little bit of
Don't
math.
make me do math.
If non-Jews have 7 mitzvos and we have 613, that would be a difference of
606.
606. Okay. But the fact is, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, the other Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, goes on to say that it's not so simple. He goes on to explain that if you take the seven
mitzvos, the Rabbanon.
Not so much the Rabbanan, but he wants to say that when the Bnei Noach are commanded against arayos, right? They're forbidden sexual relations. That's one of the 7 mitzvahs Bnei Noach. Under our 613 rubric, there's like, I don't know, 20, 30 different mitzvos there that have to be broken down. The same thing has to do with the fact that Geza, the same thing has to do with setting up a court system. So there's actually something like, he counts them out, something like 200 plus mitzvot, if you're using our categorization, that refer to the Noachide laws. And when it comes to us, out of the 613, how many do we actually do? Right? All the korbanos, all the tuma v'tahara, so many things to do with the Beis Hamikdash, all of those are, temporarily off the table. So the difference is not 606. He wants to say it's under 100 mitzvos. That we're actually much closer than we realize in terms of the amount of mitzvos that we're supposed to do. So how do we take this into the doctor and the king analogy for a second? If I would ask you, of the 200 mitzvos that Abraham, Yitzchak, Noach, Terach were all commanded in, okay? And then they got 613 at Har Sinai. What changed? What was so different? Was it just a quantitative change? That they only had mitzvos, many more mitzvos that we had to do? Or do mitzvos B'nai Noach have a different status than mitzvos to B'nai Yisrael? And Rabbi Hecht would like to say and suggested that the difference between doctors and kings applies here as well. The status of mitzvot for Bnei Noach were like recommendations. They were the best way to live. They were dispassionate. What do I mean by dispassionate? The doctor says this is how the world works, and so these are recommended. But a king says, I demand these of these, and that has a really interesting ramification. So I want to show you another Gemara now. This one is from Avodah Zarah, okay? And here, the non-Jews of the world approach Hashem and say, it's the end of days, okay? It's actually a very beautiful Gemara and a beautiful story because it kind of sets up everything that Avodah Zarah is about, which is the non-Jews are doing things a little bit wrong. They didn't get the memo. And the Gemara is kind of dealing with, well, how fair is that? Did the non-Jews really have a chance? And they want to make the case that they absolutely did have a chance. Okay? So it's a back and forth and back and forth. And one of the things they said is, well, God went to all the nations of the world and offered them the Torah. And they all said, well, what's written in it? And you know the famous story? Bnei Yishmael said, it says here, don't steal. And they said, oh, no, we need to do that. And they went to Bnei Esav and they said, Shvichos Damim, and we don't do that. Anyway, they come to Bnei Israel, and Bnei Israel say their famous statement, Naaseh v'nishma. They say, we'll just do it. We're not interested in looking at it first. We're ready to take the commitment. So that's usually how the story ends. But the Gemara goes a step further, which is fascinating. The non-Jews said, wait a second here. It wasn't like you offered it to us and we said, and then you went to the Jews and they said, yes. You held the mountain over their head. You actually created a situation where the Jews had to keep the Torah. Why didn't you do that to us? Says the non-Jews of the world, which is a beautiful, fair complaint. It sounds like, God, you had a special interest in bringing the Jewish people in part of it. How come you weren't interested in bringing us inside of it? And that's beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. So the Gemara says, you know what? Good point. And they go on to say, well, the reason why I did that was I originally gave you the 7 mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and you guys weren't so good about keeping those original mitzvot. And since you weren't so good about them, I let you off the hook. You stopped being commanded by them. And then the Gemara says, wait a second. Because they didn't keep the 7 mitzvahs B'nai Noach, they were let off the hook? They weren't commanded anymore? If so, look at the last line. Nimsach choted niskar. You find that a sinner profits. The best thing to do is stop keeping the law, and then God stops caring, right? It's kind of like being in New York, and there's a law that says you're not allowed to jaywalk, and everybody jaywalks anyway, and the police kind of throw up their hands and say, forget it. There's no way to enforce this law, and so we're going to give up, and the sinners win, right? All you need to do is have everybody reject a certain norm, and then the norm stops being a norm. People, don't care about it anymore. So the first thing, tell me, what would you say to the claim that the sinner wins, the sinner profits from sinning, from getting the jaywalking to be non-ticketed, not enforced? Anybody want to give it a thought there? What would you answer? Is it better that the New York City police don't care about jaywalking? So what I think is,
No.
no, it's not, right? The idea that a norm, an important norm, a good norm for society, and God only had good norms, what he recommended, becomes unenforceable or ignored or no longer holds us to a certain norm, everybody loses from that. It's true that you don't get punished. It's true that the police care less. And that, I think, is a really good example of what happened to a kind of moral sensibility that kind of degrades over time. And that's where God is saying. God is saying originally, right back in the time of Noah, these 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach were entirely clear, entirely evident, entirely logical, and people felt strongly about them. But over time, people got less and less and less concerned about them, and they became more like recommendations. So then the Gemara says like this. Gemara says, but wait a second. A non-Jew who keeps as osek b'Torah, he's like a Kohen Gadol. So it seems that even a non-Jew who keeps Torah can be considered a Kohen Gadol, because the Torah says, Asher yasu otam ha'adam v'chai behem. Right? You shall do them. Who should do them? Ha'adam. Who's Adam? The universal man, mankind or humankind. Okay? So we have this sense in this Gemara here that the non-Jews, if you do mitzvot, then there's a reward to be done. It doesn't say Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim. It says Ha'adam. And here the Gemara makes a really fascinating statement.
Yeah, that's
It's
nice.
true that non-Jews who keep the mitzvot have a certain reward. It's true that there's a profit to be found by keeping mitzvot. But the profit is the profit of somebody who is Eino Mitzuva V'Ose. Someone who does it not as the king standing in front of him, but does it like somebody who's under doctor's advice, right? So there's something more distant, less involved, and less seriousness with the way in which the commands are treated by the non-Jews. It's not like a legal command that's put down by the doctor that we sit down and we write Shulchan Aruch and we write Mishnah Brura and we go to every detail and we decide how exactly do we do this. A woman who's a nida is 7 days plus another 7 days, and we have to check and not check. And in the non-Jewish world, you could say, okay, I understand why, it's not comfortable or people don't want to do this, but the exactitude, the concern with how levels of detail is not the same way. Tosfot comments on that Gemara, that what does it mean that someone who's commanded and does it is better off? Because he's always worried about his yetzer. It's actually a different reason. When you're commanded, what happens? The natural inclination is to say, don't tell me what to do, right? The natural inclination to say, you must keep Shabbos. If you told me Shabbos was a nice idea, it's a great idea to unplug every 24 hours, every 7, once in 7 days. In fact, I heard a report once on NPR. I was listening to NPR radio, and they were making a recommendation, this great invention that they said, and they're recommending everybody do it. It was called Unplug for 24 hours. And they were telling everybody to turn off their social media, turn off their computers, turn off their emails, and unplug. And I'm listening to the NPR report, and it says, you guys have just invented Shabbos, right? All of a sudden, the whole world is turned around and realized that being on and plugged in and worried about what everybody's saying and worried about the rat race out there is not healthy. And it was like doctor's orders, right? Here, the world has come to the conclusion that Shabbat is a brilliant idea. It's so healthy. It's so beautiful. It makes so much sense. However, we were not recommended to keep Shabbat. We were told to keep Shabbat. We were commanded to keep Shabbat. And what that does is it raises our negation, right? It confronts our will. It confronts our autonomy. And when we're told not just what a lovely idea is to keep Shabbat, and most humans say, okay, thank you, but this week I'm too busy. This week I can't afford to do it. This week I really need to be on my computer. It's a lovely idea, but thank you very much. I'll do it in 2 weeks' time. The idea of being in a relationship where you're commanded and you really don't have any choice takes the onus of the burden off of you and allows you to say, it's not my choice anymore. And in many ways, that is the healthiest way to treat things that are recommended. When you have to decide whether you're going to keep your diet, yes or no, you know that sugar is not good for you, and the doctor said high cholesterol, you have to come off. And every day you have to make a decision. Is it enough? Can I do it? This or that? But when it's a command, he says, this is it, right? You cannot have this. I forbid you, if somebody could even do that. So that, in many ways, does you a favor, because it removes part of the struggle from the what to the relationship. At the same time, it makes a different struggle, which is perhaps even harder, which is, who are you to tell me what to do? Right? The authority question. So here Tosfos is saying, when you're commanded, it raises your desire to rebel, and that's why you have more reward. You have more reward because you have to keep mitzvot when you weren't really given a choice. Okay, so to sum up, the advantages of doctor versus king is the doctor idea is universal. It applies with a logic and a sensibility that applies to every human being in the world. And to the extent that the Torah is doctor's orders, in many sense, it's something which is the best recommendation for everybody in the world. The fact it's doctor who discovers the unchanging laws of science. So these aren't things which are, how shall we say, changing. They are true in all order and all time. And it kind of gives the doctor a certain amount of empowerment to feel like people can discover these laws. We can figure it out for ourselves. It's why people who are kind of living in the doctor mode pick and choose, or they can say, well, this doesn't apply to me, or this is not really what I need right now, or this doctor doesn't quite understand me. Because it's discovery, it's kind of empowering to the human. The king versus doctor, the advantage of the king is invested in the subject's success. It's not like it's neutral. Follow it or not, it's up to you. The fact that the God has come down at Har Sinai and say, I'm holding you to this, I'm holding the mountain over your head, and I'm going to trap you by this, is a way of saying, like a parent, that it matters to me if you keep these rules. It's not neutral. It's not impersonal. I am invested here. Also, it's a relationship, which makes it difficult because it sometimes makes you feel like you want to get out of it, but it's responsive, it's alive, it's dynamic. God is there to respond back and forth, and that has other important consequences. And this is, I think this is, I think where we'll end. I just want to say one more word about how much Rabbi Hecht was a inspiration and a role model for me of somebody who really wrestled with the Torah, really tried to make it understandable and intelligible. It mattered to him whether these things made sense, As we can see from his writings about the flow, he made a lot of sense of even the confrontation, even the demands, even things that didn't seem to make sense. He made sense of why it's important to have things that don't make sense, why it's important to be able to subjugate is too strong, because he wasn't like that. He was always in wrestling with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. So he lived this dynamic. He wanted to make things as understandable and natural in a certain sense as possible, but he also understood how necessary the confrontation and the ability of the perhaps the unnatural amounts of it, how much that confrontation in the relationship was critical. And I wish you all to have a good Shavuot. I wish you all that you will be able to relate to Kodesh Baruch Hu as a good doctor who's got great advice for you, and as a loving but demanding king who's very much requiring you and invested in your success and health and there for your best interest, and requiring you to do the right thing. And that you should be able to find both those aspects in the relationship with you and the Kodesh Baruch Hu. Chag Sameach to all of you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. It was
Pleasure.
really wonderful. It's like hearing
Thank you.
parts of my father again. Thank you, Rabbi. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Dodi. It really, the thanks really goes from me to him. He was the one who taught.
I know the booklet you're talking about. So.
Right, that little blue booklet.
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good Yontif.
You too. Chag Sameach.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Sylvia. Thanks for joining us.
Bye. No, it was a pleasure to join you. Thank you for doing this.
No, I'm glad. So nice to see you.
Yeah.
Very good. Take care.
You too. I'm trying to get off this.
That's okay. I also trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Okay.